So welcome everybody to this breakout session on understanding the impact of employment and skills support. Obviously, we've heard this morning that unemployment is expected to rise this year. Long-term unemployment is already rising. Deprived areas have been hit hardest, and generally those who were most disadvantaged prior to the crisis have suffered most in labour market terms, which is particularly the case for social housing tenants. 94% of housing associations reported an increase in residents suffering economic hardship as a result of COVID-19, which I think to many won't be any surprise. But clearly housing associations do and will play a vital role in supporting their residents back into work or closer to the labour market, and in supporting the broader levelling up agenda and helping to build back better. And lots of people have talked this morning about the opportunity to do things differently and to do things better. And clearly within that, we need to evaluate and monitor the impacts of interventions to understand whether that's actually happening. So in this session, we're going to explore some of the ways in which we perceive and measure the impact of employment and skills support, and how we can use this information and knowledge to continually improve services. It's something that we very much champion at Learning and Work. It's part of the reason why we established the What Works unit for Learning and Work. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Sandra Coling, who's Chair of GM Housing Providers and Assistant Chief Executive for Stockpot Homes Group. And she's going to give the GM Housing Providers perspective. That's a group of 25 housing providers providing 1 in 5 homes in the city region. Also joined by Professor Peter Wells from Sheffield Hallam University, who's Professor of Public Policy Analysis and Evaluation and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the College of Social Sciences and Arts. And he led the evaluation of Talent Match, which he'll be talking about, which was really quite an innovative youth employment support programme that was co-designed and co-delivered with support from young people and via local partnerships. And just before I hand over to Sandra and Peter, can I remind attendees to remain on mute and with your video switched off during the session. Can you please make sure that your Zoom ID lists either your name or your organisation, or preferably both. And just to remind people that we're recording this session, and we will make the recording available after the event. And please use the chat to submit questions as well. So I'm going to hand over to Peter and Sandra. Sandra's going to speak first, and they're going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. So Sandra, can I hand straight over to you, yes, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, and welcome everyone. And I will do the norm, and just give me 1 second while I open my presentation. Okay. Welcome everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be able to do this presentation today and give a little bit of a background to the work that we're doing in Greater Manchester. But I wanted to highlight that I actually am here really with 3 hats. I think, first of all, I'm the Assistant Chief Executive of Stockpot Homes Group. We're in Elmo, so we're a little bit different in that sense that we're wholly owned by the council, Stockpot Council, but we are very arm's length, so we do a wide range of other work in addition to just being the landlord. And I lead for employment support within Stockport. I'm also the chair of the Greater Manchester House Providers for Employment and Skills, and as Naomi said, it's a group of 25 organisations. It's a really positive collaboration, and we have various different themes that we look at, and employment and skills is a very important theme that is prioritised as part of that partnership. I'm also the vice chair of Athena. Not everybody probably have heard of Athena. Athena is a company, a wholly owned company of the housing providers that was set up to bid for external contracts. So it's, you know, much more of that further collaboration, but it's got that separate entity that sometimes you need for those sort of tenders. So I know a lot of today we've talked about, you know, the role of housing, but I just thought it might be useful to give my take on why Greater Manchester in particular find it so important to do additional work on employment and skills. I think as we've said, we do have unique relationships with our residents. We collect their rent, we deal with ASB, but we also provide a wide range of housing support services to our customers and neighbourhood regeneration and cohesion. So we're not, you know, we are on people's doorsteps on a regular basis. So it's quite a unique relationship there. And we do operate in some of the country's most deprived areas. I think even in Stockport, where most people would think it's quite an affluent area, and it is one of the affluent boroughs of Greater Manchester, we do have some really severe areas of deprivation, tend to be in our properties, and you know, it can get masked in areas where that are not seen as a whole as deprived. And we're more than just landlords. You know, it's about all our values, and that's something that working in Greater Manchester, we, you know, while we're all different organisations, we do have that shared values about supporting our customers. And we typically take a long-term approach, especially around community development and cohesion. I think we look at, you know, what would that neighbourhood look like in 10, 20 years' time, whether it's improvement works or community development. And I think that's where we, you know, we can take, when employment and skills, we can take that longer term view. And we're major employers. Yeah, it was interesting to see, I think it was David Orr said, you know, Clarion have 3,500 employees. We have just over 700. So we, you know, we don't always look at how we're providing employment support to other organisations and other companies. It's about what we can do ourselves. So, you know, why is it important to measure impact? I think, you know, it is about demonstrating effective investment. We spend, you know, a 6-figure sum on sort of employment support within Stockpot Homes, and you know, it's about, as part of that budget setting process and, you know, actually bidding for more money, it's about demonstrating the, you know, the outcomes to our boards, but also to our communities, you know, showing that what we can do and how we can support them and how we can make a difference. But also to funders, I think that's becoming increasingly more important, that if we want to win a contract, we need to prove that what we've done before is effective. And I think it's really important to understand what programmes are the most successful and what aren't, and be honest about what doesn't work. Different programmes will work in different communities, and I think the only way you can understand that and actually direct your resources to you know, where it needs to the most is about measuring that impact. So I wanted to give, you know, issues that we've discussed in Greater Manchester, and some of them we're still grappling with, I'll be honest, but some of them that, you know, I think when you're actually, if you were starting from the beginning about how we're going to measure impact, I think these are some of the things that I would, you know, suggest that people look at. I think the first thing is the difference between qualitative and quantitative data, and they're both relevant. So I think there is something about the pure numbers, you know, how many people are engaged, how many people go on to work, how many people are attending a training session. But equally, we've got value out of doing focus groups and case studies, and actually that one-to-one, because sometimes the numbers miss a trick. They miss actually what worked well and what didn't. So I think it's about sort of coming up with a sort of a framework that captures both of those. It is about using some of the accredited methodologies. These are particularly useful, I think, when you're going for tenders and for bids. We use HACT. There are other methodologies, but HACT is, well renowned, and actually, it's the figures can be, people trust the figures that come out of HACT. I think also we look at, creating prosperous communities. So we look at our employment figures, and we look at how many people get employment, but we look at those communities and what difference that makes to that community. And I think that looking at some of those wider determinants can be really valuable. And also about development customer pathways. I think the minister and a few people mentioned this morning, it is about getting people into work. I always think it's, there's benefits getting people into that first run of the ladder, but then actually getting them better jobs and then getting them careers. And I think actually having some sort of method of measuring that, I think, is really important. And it's understanding it requires time, it requires a certain skill, but also participation. And what we measure actually where people are in 6 months' time. I'd like to be able to say we measure where people are in 5 years' time. We haven't got that, because that's so. One, it's about capturing where people are in 5 years' time, but also having the sort of resources to do that. But I think it's thinking that up front about how how you're going to manage it. Is it doable? And actually, what's putting processes in place. I think it is important to understand who engage as well as those who don't. So again, I think it is the demographic, it is success rates and locations, because actually different programs can work differently for different cohorts of people. I think the wider impact, again, with that, I really believe, and I think I'm sure everybody on this call believes, there's a real direct correlation between people being in employment and their health and well-being. And sometimes you might not have the success of getting someone into work, but you might get them volunteering, you might get them being more confident, they might go out, out in their community, do more in their community, and that should be seen as a success. So I think it is about thinking what wider impacts you would want in that community, looking at the dynamics of that community. But it's about the whole family, the whole household. It's about school attainment, ASB, rent arrears. It's about what else is going on that actually that person being reduced anxiety, engage with other people actually could help the whole household. And I think that, it's hard, it's not easy, but it's trying to capture some of that. And I think the quality of job, the quality of work, I think is something that we're working at and feel, pretty passionate about, to be honest, is getting people into work. So, and that may be sort of a 0-hour contract, which are not great, I know, but actually how can we get them going on that career path into a living wage, how sustainable that job is. We've all probably known people we've worked with who get into the job, then a couple of months later might lose that job, and then actually they're in and out of benefits. And while, that is just difficult to manage. And I think it is looking at what we've tried to do within GM, what we're looking at this year in particular, is looking at those with the greatest gains. We keep being told, and loads of evidence say there's a massive shortage of people with digital skills, and the starting salary could be 25k. And there's people as our customers, as our tenants, who there won't be many, but may have the skills and the aptitude to go into those jobs. And if we can just give them that sort of that bit of a push, or that bit of that way into that, I think that could make massive gains in getting those people out of poverty. Again, I think with COVID, I think we're starting to measure sort of the transition to digital skills and creating digital pathways. I think, like was mentioned this morning, we moved everything on, virtually everything, online. Did loads of, if you look on Stockpot Homes YouTube, there's loads of training videos there that we've done if anyone wanted to have a look. But obviously there are people who are digitally excluded. So I think it is about thinking, when you're looking how you're going to measure the impact, trying to, we've started adding some indicators around digital skills and reducing those who are digitally excluded. And I think one thing we found, I'm sure others here probably have, is that the people who are coming to us now are nearer to the employment market. So there are a lot of people obviously lost their jobs, maybe their industry is gone at the moment. So the amount of, we could just, if we just measured numbers, it'd be wonderful. We'd have, with certain people around and actually got these fabulous numbers about getting people into work. But really, we were just a signposter. We weren't, it wasn't that, there's a big difference between that than someone who is, really, far away from the employment market, and even bringing them a little bit towards the employment market is I would say, a better result. obviously we want to help people in the community, but I think we're trying to work out how we measure the difference between those type of people as part of our impact report. And, you know, I think as we all know, there's a change in landscape. You know, there will be additional funding. It is about, you know, the whole building back better. And I think when we're looking at how we measure it, we need to think about how that changes what we're looking at now. That hopefully gives us a bit of an overview of the things that we consider when we've been discussing this over, in particular over the last 12 months. I thought, first of all, I won't dwell on it too much, a bit about Stockpot Homes, and we have a range of different programmes that are, you know, nothing there that I'm sure you wouldn't have heard of. But then, you know, we've been sort of advertising things like this online, obviously during the pandemic. And we have, I suppose, what we do, we have a suite of employment figures, you know, the numbers, but have those wider wellbeing factors, you know, improve self-confidence, education attainment and health, to try to give that more holistic approach. And also trying to measure customers who are returning to us, and that is not seen as a negative. It's about, you know, if they got onto that first level of job, actually they're starting to come back to us and saying, that's great, I'm fine, but actually I won't mind doing, you know, getting on and have that career pathway. So we've started developing career pathways, and actually looking at funding targets again, looking at how much, you know, we look at how much obviously our employment support costs, where we get our money from external contracts, and actually try to have targets to bring that. We also measure individual projects through HACT. That's a really, as I said, a really good way to when you're actually bidding for something externally. And we use case studies. As I said, some of that case studies, it's not statistically valid, but it really gives a sense of what's happened for that individual, and it helps us inform the way we deliver things. And we produce things like, you know, like this, to be honest. This is more the publicity, but it gives a sense of the sort of work we do. So the sort of focus on Greater Manchester housing providers, we have a really active group of about 15 organisations within Greater Manchester who come on a regular basis. We used to meet quarterly. We've been meeting more frequently with the pandemic to really help each other and support each other, but see how we need to change things. So we've got a massive spreadsheet. I could share it if anyone's interested in what we collect. And then we sort of pull that together and actually then look at the detail and look at why people have different outcomes, what works, what doesn't, looking at the different communities. Because we are, you know, Greater Manchester, you know, it's 10 local authorities, the north of the borough, where you're talking Bolton and Oldham and Salford, compared to maybe Trafford and Stockport at the south. They are very different dynamics going on, different industries, different services within those areas. And so some of that, you know, it's about understanding, you know, that can make a difference between what works and what doesn't. So we really, you know, best practice and share resources. And we create 5 pledges about how we're going to improve skills and employment. I can provide any detail after this if anyone's interested. But what we said we'd focus on this year, we wanted to say, what can we do together that can make the biggest difference? And in particular, the two, I'd say, the growing industries is a whole thing around retrofit and getting people trained to be able to deliver the programme, and digital and IT, which I've also already mentioned. I think retrofit is, you know, it is a bit about what comes first. People don't have, you know, retrofit put into their properties because there's not the tradespeople to do that. And we feel there's a real market there for actually getting some of our customers, some of our tenants trained into those emerging industries. Again, I think will make a massive difference to them. Construction we put, because that, you know, at the end of the day, we all have repair services. Some of them have construction companies. So again, I think it's about us coming together, particularly maybe sort of people from a BAME background or women, that we can do some innovative work there to try to get people who wouldn't normally come into construction into that industry. And this is sort of the thing that it leads to. Not too sure you can see the detail, but I didn't think it was that important. I can share this afterwards as well. This would be on our social media page. So this is sort of what we pull an infographic together, which shows our combined impact. And you can see there it's got, you know, the numbers of people supported into employment, also about people into their setting up their own business, and sort of apprenticeships, and apprenticeships through our sort of new build programs. And this is, I mean, there's a big spreadsheet. This was more just what we thought people would be interested in if we put it on social media. But it gives you a sense of the sort of the outcomes that we produce and to show the impact that housing providers can provide. I mean, it was interesting to hear what the Minister said and the results of the last poll, because I think sometimes, I know I feel, I'm sure many people here would as well, that, you know, housing associations people don't feel that we're the people to go to for employment support, and actually we're the very people to go because we have that unique relationship with our customers and our tenants. So I think that's what we've, you know, used this really unashamedly to promote the work that we do, to show what impacts that we can provide. Also, as part of the housing providers, we set up a separate company called Athena. And it's really a way of, you know, working together as part of, you know, contracts that come up. So it's a separate entity. The biggest one was Motivate. I'm not too sure everybody's heard of that. That was a 10 million pound programme that's just been extended, obviously a European and Community Fund bid. And, you know, this is you know, say bog standard, but it's a very much traditional contract with, you know, figures. But you can see here, even with this, it's about health and well-being and self-confidence, not just about how many people get into work. This in particular is about the people who are the furthest away from the employment market. So that's why actually improving someone's health and just their, you know, their self-confidence is so important as part of this. And you know, if you looked at the figures of people into work, it's actually probably quite low compared to some other programs, but that's because of the people that it supports. Just to conclude, hopefully, you know, I've explained really that, you know, measuring impact should be used and has to be used to inform delivering resources. It has to be meaningful in your local area and has to be achievable. Don't set something up that is laudable, but you're never going to have the time to be able to do. And it needs to be adaptable and immense sort of as programs and delivery changes. Thank you. I've just put some of my contact details, and a lot of that information will be either on the Greater Manchester Housing Providers website or the Athena website, and obviously our Twitter handles. But if you needed anything more or anything on the background, please get in touch. Thank you. Stop sharing that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. Really interesting to hear about how housing providers are working together to share best practice, and some really important reminders about the importance of capturing those wider outcomes, particularly when you're working with people who are further from the labour market, and trying to understand what doesn't work as well as what does work. And being honest about that. So thank you. I'm going to hand straight over to Peter.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me, and I'm just going to take a moment to just get my slides on screen. It's going to take a second and share those. Just waiting for it to go to full screen. It takes just a moment. Yeah, and I think you should be able to all see that now. Assuming if you can't hear me or see the slides, Naomi will shout up and say I'm doing something wrong. So yeah, just we're really honoured really to kind of follow be at the Learning and Work Institute conference actually. Should say a big vote of thanks to Learning and Work Institute. You know, sort of every month for the day after employment stats are published, probably for the last, I don't know how many years, I look at the LWI website for up-to-date information. And if there's any questions I have, I'm sort of thinking, should I look that up myself? No, it'll probably be on Learning and Work Institute pages somewhere, and they'll have thought about some of the employment issues. And really also good to follow Sandra and Stockpot Homes, interesting work in Greater Manchester. We're doing a small piece, separate, I'm not involved, but a colleague is, around the Working Well initiative in Greater Manchester, and really interesting to see what, particularly the sort of place shapers, housing associations are doing in this space, and really echo what Sandra has said. I'm going to start, I'm going to cover a couple of things, and just a couple of things, just really following on what Sandra said. If you need to get in contact after this presentation, please do so by email. I'm going to talk a lot about the talent match evaluation in my presentation. There's a link to all the reports, the data, the tools we've used, questionnaires. If you're looking at survey instruments, they're all available on that website. Just Google talent match evaluation and you'll come to that website. So I'm going to cover a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about talent match, which in some ways was the largest non-statutory response to the youth employment crisis of the early 2010s, as it were, following the financial crisis. I also want to look ahead in terms of how do we understand effectiveness, and particularly in response to the current crisis. So, yeah, talent match. So a little bit about just an overview of the program. Some of you will be familiar with it from your own areas. It was a £108 million National Lottery Community Fund, or Big Lottery at the time, strategic program, targeted those aged 18 to 24. Typically, those furthest from the labour market, measured initially in terms of time out of the labour market, out of the workforce. And particularly trying to test out, using a test and learn approach to explore how to support young people with a range of barriers, and some of those are listed there. Evaluation was delivered, the programme was delivered over 5 years, 14 to 18, and we published the final reports on it last year. Key features of the programme is led by young people. I can't stress that enough. It really sort of broke the mould, and certainly to statutory providers, you know, Job Centre Plus, DWP provision, it was led by young people involved in the design of local programmes, involved in evaluation. We involved them in our evaluation. Some of the delivery was led by young people. And I think it sort of shifted the dial. Not everything went well, everything was right, but it had a higher level of involvement than I've seen in any other programme delivered in the UK. Focuses on 21 areas, broadly conceived of at LEP level, local enterprise partnership at the time in England. Voluntary and community sector in each place was a lead partner, typically local and national charities, but interestingly not housing associations. So I don't think any housing associations led a local partnership. I know housing associations led, for example, building better opportunities type initiatives around employment. And it wasn't just about jobs, and it was also non-mandatory. So young people weren't conscripted. They weren't sanctioned if they didn't get involved in this programme. Just some headline figures. Is a big programme, not obviously much smaller than national government schemes and much smaller than Kickstart, but around 26,000 young people were supported by the programme, and nearly half of them secured some form of employment, just in kind of the raw data, and about 6 kind of went on to secure some form of sustainable employment. Yeah, so about 4,500 young people. And remembering that these were often young people with kind of a range of complex barriers in what is a competitive labour market, you know. So can say a little bit more about those achievements, but it compared favourably to other programmes, Future Jobs Fund and other schemes at a programme level. Just in sense of the nature of the employment secured and the quality. Naomi mentioned helpfully about, you know, stepping stones, pathways through employment, and I think that was something that really came through in our work when we gathered data pretty much on all those 26,000 young people. Certainly at the baseline stage, the initial programme stage. We then followed them up at 6, 18, 24 months, sorry, 3, 6, 18 and 24 months periods to get their experiences. And when we did follow them up, they saw the jobs they'd secured as a stepping stone. It was a worthwhile experience. Job was important. It was interesting. They're happy with the level of pay. And they saw it as part of a career. They didn't necessarily see they would stay in that job forever. And, you know, thinking of, you know, our own career paths, you know, and career paths of young people, that's certainly true. So quite a really positive findings, which kind of goes against perhaps the normal experience or the publicised experience of many young people. And there were factors which helped with higher levels of reported quality and satisfaction with employment. The actual support voluntary organisations played, and I know other studies on where housing providers have provided this type of support. Again, it improves employment prospects. Nonetheless, 20%, nearly 20% did say that they were concerned the job wasn't going anywhere. It's quite a remarkable achievement for this type of programme, I should say. Certainly much more favourable than work programme and others. What were they doing? Actually, a lot in permanent employment, some with temporary jobs, about 6. Some with temporary job but no end date, some self-employed, actually more than the population of 18 to 24-year-olds. So self-employment was a theme and a feature. But about a tenth had on 0 hours contracts, and the vast majority wanted more secure employment. And importantly, many, for the skills they had, felt underemployed. So they perhaps weren't working full time. They weren't feeling they were fully using their skills and so forth. Now, this is so we use the Office of National Statistics, the kind of headline well-being measures around anxiety, happiness, feeling worthwhile, and life satisfaction. Okay, and what we looked at here was experiences, again, over that longer period of the programme. So after the sort of 6, 12 and 18-month periods in particular, had those who achieved an employment outcome, which is the top line in yeses, and those who hadn't, the no's, so at the bar below. So, and again, majority of young people, their well-being improved. Around a fifth, so no change. But critically, perhaps, depending on the measure, anything from a sixth to a third almost, experienced a negative change in well-being. Now, of course, this is a period of a lot of change in people's lives. Housing factors, for example, that was reported that, wasn't just about the job, it was also about secure housing and housing prospects. About 10% of the people supported had experienced homelessness of some form. And this is a group facing many barriers to entering work. Positive overall, but important to kind of recognise it was often long-term support. It wasn't just a kind of one-off package of a week or 3-month support. It was often young people would come back to the providers, the voluntary organisations, for more support. It was kind of a no wrong door approach. To be honest, and these are the kind of warts and all bits. What didn't it achieve? There was a level of underemployment. There was a significant level of 0 hours contract. I'm not sure Talent Match could have shifted some of those much more than it did. Significant numbers did report worsening well-being. The critical one, and it's really interesting to hear Sandra talking about partnerships across Greater Manchester, and it is in many respects a beacon for this sort of work, is there were problems in some areas engaging key partners, particularly around employers, and particularly the relatively new at the time local enterprise partnerships. Some weren't at all interested, if I'm honest, with working with voluntary organisations. Some beacons on this. Greater Manchester, I'd stress, was one. Liverpool City region, another. The Humber area had really good relationships with both employers and also employer organisations and economic development organisations. Some issues and concerns around proliferation of local initiatives and crowded landscape, particularly at the time. Things like building better opportunities at the time. There was more ESF funding as well. And some sense of, were the partnerships really targeting need, or were they kind of not quite sure? So an area for great improvement. And again, there was variability. London sprang out had really good labour market intelligence. A bit of a plug for LWI there, because I know that they worked in partnership with London Youth on this. and really sort of targeted and understood the benefits this sort of programme could bring to particular groups. And there were legacy projects where, again, these things seem to work well in Liverpool, the Black Country and the Humber, where there's that sense of really understanding we can meet the needs of this group and we have something to offer. It's an honesty around saying, actually, we can't deliver that. That's not our field. Looking ahead, what are we looking at? The kind of sort of development of local ecosystems for employment support, certainly with combined authorities in the lead. Interestingly, around the challenges of Kickstart, and particularly the talent match group, will they really be supported in the future? Typical of problems, and I'll flag this in a moment, around weaker labour market areas and the availability of jobs. We did find outcomes did vary to some extent, depending on the strength of local labour markets. And there was a need for the key working, a few factors here: outreach to deprived communities, so knowing your tenants, knowing your residents, key working, building relationships, and then high quality IAG were really crucial, almost platforms from which to build. And involving young people was, again, a strong feature. So just a few more slides. I just wanted to sort of look ahead a little bit about what next. And we've done a little bit of work in Sheffield, developing sort of skills and employment strategy for the city. And some of this is typical for other core cities, I think, but I think there were some lessons here more generally. Neighbourhood effects. This slide, the map to the right is a map of Sheffield. Sheffield's very much divided east-west in terms of poverty and economic opportunity. And you see those dark blue colours are the areas of highest unemployment. An area like Burngreave, which is in the northeast of the city, actually unemployment rates are up to, just for the whole population, of over 20% now. And that's on claimant numbers. That's ignoring the kind of wider ILO measure, and also those who might be hidden from the labour market, not claiming benefits, not in education, employment or training to engage. It could be much higher, could be a third or higher of the working age population, and significantly high for young people. Really, really hard conditions in some particular neighbourhoods. Want to flag this as a challenge, and this is something typical of many cities. This is the kind of skills mismatch. The dark blue shows the number of jobs and the skill level they require. The light blue, the qualification level the population holds. So it's NVQ4 and above, so HNDs, 30 degrees and so forth, NVQ3, 2 and 1. And what we see is in Sheffield, but similar in Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, an oversupply potentially of highly skilled people. And that's dramatically increased in the last 10 years. These figures have gone up a lot. What we apparently see an undersupply of people with the right skills at this. What's happening is with growth in skills at high levels, but this is outstripped. The demand doesn't keep pace for that supply of skills. It increases competition across the labour market, and essentially a large number of this group will be sort of trading down, increasing competition for what might be entry-level jobs at levels 1 and 2. That in turn reduces incentives for people to train, to take on new training. Just to kind of finish up here, this is a map on the right from the figures that came out this week on unemployment by constituency. It's from the House of Commons paper, library paper. So quite a traditional map, quite a typical map of high levels of claimant unemployment in the urban areas, traditional industrial areas, and a number of coastal cities as well. Some things to think about and things that have come up locally for us in Sheffield is around the response to the crisis. The access to support and navigating that landscape can be quite complicated. How the economy's reset, particularly thinking about the growth in digital skills and the need for digital skills, which has really been shown starkly over the last few years, and reshaping the economy. Where will the new jobs come from for the future, and how do we engage impact in those sorts of questions. So some concluding thoughts. Impact, as we showed in Talent Match, wasn't just about measuring employment. It was about progression, and progression not being linear. We did reveal weaknesses and fragmentation in employment support. I think a lot of work's been done in certain places. Greater Manchester, a good example. COVID pandemic has exposed weak labour markets, both locally and at that neighbourhood level. And government employment support responses are welcome, but as we're seeing, aren't necessarily reaching particular areas sufficiently, and not providing sufficient support for those furthest from work. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll stop sharing there, and yeah, thanks a lot.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. Really interesting to see the results from Talent Match, and I think some important points about the differences in terms of the challenges at the local level, and the role of local partnerships in trying to address those. And clearly housing associations are part of that and need to be part of the response. I'm going to suggest that we open up to Q&A now, and that we stop recording so that people can just ask questions themselves if they want to. We've already had a question on the chat about essentially how organisations can work together to understand the impact that they have, and I've got a number of questions for Sandra and Peter too. So if anybody else wants to ask a question, feel free to turn your videos on and unmute yourselves,